I'm pleased to welcome Officer Hunter Lisko. Uh, Hunter's a neighborhood resource officer here on the west side of Madison, the West District, uh, with the Madison Police Department. I've met Hunter a couple of times at Coffee with a Cop, and he's really very knowledgeable and a young guy, doing this tough work, working out solutions in our neighborhoods. And so I want to turn it over to Hunter here. If you want, he says it's okay if you interject with your questions. So let's make it a nice conversation as we go along. And I think everyone's going to really find this useful. Hunter, please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into policing as a profession, and specifically, how you got to be a neighborhood resource officer, which I understand there's one in each district. Is that true?
Yes, well, Mike, thank you so much for this invite. I'm really excited to be here, and I always joke that the first requisite of being a neighborhood officer is not being afraid to step into spaces and chat with people, right? So I'll actually just advance because I have a few pictures of myself that I think tell a little bit of a story here. So as Mike said, my name is Hunter Lisko. I've been a police officer with MPD since May of 2019. So I'm in my sixth year with the Madison Police Department. And for the last 5 years, I was a patrol officer. I worked in the Central, Midtown, and East police districts through the course of my patrol career, as well as the West District last year, and then transitioned starting this year into the neighborhood resource officer role. So a little bit about me and my background before I get to kind of the nuts and bolts of what is a neighborhood resource officer. So as I said, I joined the MPD in May of 2019. I came here directly from college. I went to the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, had a degree in political science and public administration, and always had kind of assumed I'd wind up in Madison, but working in state government or working in the state capitol. And quickly found through a paid legislative internship with a state senator that working behind the desk was maybe not the right path for me, and that I was looking for something a little more hands-on and a little more dynamic. Growing up, I'm from the Fond du Lac area, so if we have any other lifelong Wisconsinites, I have much appreciation for you. I'm from the 920 area code and proud of it. But I grew up in Fond du Lac County and grew up in a household where my parents separated when I was about one. So I grew up in a household that I never had two parents who lived together peacefully or coexisted. My dad had a lifelong substance abuse issue, alcohol abuse issue, drug abuse issue, and was a perpetrator of domestic violence against my family. And that really was impactful for me. And that had at a young age kind of put some thoughts into my mind about law enforcement and what do police officers do. Ultimately, when I was in high school, I was about 14 years old. My dad went to prison. He was arrested and he was convicted for some pretty egregious crimes, and he went to prison. And at the time, it was not a positive experience for me with local law enforcement there. And I always had this chip on my shoulder of thinking, boy, I could do that job better. I didn't like the way that I was treated. I didn't like how that impacted me. And had always kind of had that thought in the back of my mind that, well, I could do it better, but sort of drifted into the route of legislative politics and advocacy. And I loved campaigns. And so I was probably a very boring teenager because I spent much of my free time working on political campaigns and doing that whole shtick for a while. And that led me down the politics path. And ultimately, as I said, it just turned out that the behind the scenes, the legislative work of that was not for me. And in college, I had the awesome experience of being able to become a reserve police officer for the town of Campbell, which is in the La Crosse area. So I was not a sworn police officer, but I helped with their special events. I did traffic direction. I did all sorts of planning, community outreach, those sorts of things, and caught what we kind of call the law enforcement bug. And from there, it springboarded me into looking at places in Wisconsin that I was willing or wanting to work, and kind of learned quickly the reputation of the Madison Police Department for being progressive, for being community oriented, and for being really leaders in the space of community policing. And so launched down that path of applying to the Madison Police Department and was lucky enough to be hired. I was put on what we call our contingency list. So I was almost not hired the first go around, but luckily about 2 weeks before my academy class started, I got a call from our then training captain, and she said, "Hey, we've got a spot open for you." And the rest is sort of history here. So that's a little bit about the background. I did want to just include some of these photos because it will kind of come up throughout the presentation. But someone always said, if you can find a picture of you with a dog, put it in a presentation. People love dogs and it builds that trust. So I took some photos with dogs intentionally to include in any PowerPoints that I might ever give. So please enjoy that. I also serve part of my duties is I serve as one of our backup public information officers for the Madison Police Department. So we have a full-time public information officer. That person does get vacation. She does get days off, and so someone needs to answer the calls from the media in her absence. And so down in the right-hand corner, you can see I've been featured on television and in the news, and am a frequent contributor to that discourse as well. I will also add that, and this is a cheap plug, so Mike, forgive me for making a plug so early here, but I'm the coordinator of the Madison Police Department and Madison Fire Department 9/11 Memorial Blood Drive. Certainly, September 11th is something that's big in the first responder community, and one of the ways we give back is by coordinating a blood drive. So I partner with my colleagues at the fire department to coordinate that. And so there's a picture of me with the victory pose, as we call it, at one of our recent 9/11 blood drives. And so we are recruiting for that. If anybody's interested, I'd be happy to answer questions about that later. But what I'm getting at is I wear many hats at the police department. And I did this both as a patrol officer and now again as a neighborhood officer. And so I want to talk a little bit as we go throughout this presentation about how does our department work? How do we get all of our missions accomplished? And it's through a lot of volunteerism. It's through a lot of hand raising and that spirit of being willing to step up to the plate. And we have many officers who are willing to do just that. And so just wanted to share a few of those as we get going. So to take us to our next part of our journey here, I know many of your guests in the room today have probably heard some version of the speech about how our police department is organized, but I really thought it was important to key in on this because I'm about to launch into a bunch of acronyms and a bunch of terms and phrases that all have particular meaning to us, and I think it's a little lost without some of the details of our organizational chart. So I just share this by way of explanation. Where I fall in this organizational chart is, of course, the chief of police is at the top. There are 3 assistant chiefs of police, and the districts all have their own captain and lieutenants that coordinate district level activities. I, as a neighborhood resource officer, fall under a district chain of command. Mike, as you mentioned, I work in the West Police District. That's the station on McKenna Boulevard for those familiar. And where my role sits organizationally here is kind of under the 6 districts. You see patrol, CPT, and then NPO/NRO. I fall there. And we use a lot of different words to describe similar but somewhat different positions. So there are neighborhood resource officers, there are neighborhood police officers, there is the community outreach and resource education team, and there are community policing teams. So all lots of very similar sounding words that fall in somewhat different places. So I just point out as we're on this slide, patrol, the community policing teams, the neighborhood police officers, and the neighborhood resource officers fall into the district chain of command. And then that community outreach and resource education or core team, they fall under the assistant chief of community support and outreach and are in their own chain of command. And that will make a little more sense here as I advance the slide. So as police officers, we use a bunch of acronyms for a bunch of things, and it's daunting. We actually hand our new police officers a full page and a half of just acronyms that they're going to hear and probably want to know about. And so I figured I would include some of these for you, and it sets up well the explanation of how we divide these duties. So to start, and I'll just go down this list, a neighborhood police officer, or NPO, is an officer who is assigned to a specific geographical area within a district. They have a specific area. It's generally a smaller area, maybe 1 or 2 apartment complexes, or 1 or 2 blocks or 3 blocks of a street, or a specific kind of defined set of parameters where that officer works. Their long-term goal is community outreach, crime reduction, and sustainable neighborhoods, meaning how do we help people in this neighborhood transition from being responsible or reactive to us and causing us to react to crime to sustainable and self-sufficient and moving forward beyond some of the pattern problems that we see. So NPOs, those are geographically specific folks. NROs, which is my title and my responsibility, are within a district, but technically we're kind of what we'd call the free safety of policing. We have obligations for the whole district, and we are sort of jacks of all trades used as a district-wide resource. Often we're used in areas that are what we'd call maybe more transitional, meaning that there might have at one point been a need for an NPO specific to that area, but now we've kind of graduated or moved on and seen a reduction in some of the problems, but we still want to give some attention or some support or additional opportunities to that neighborhood through the police department. And so we get some of those more transitional areas, but certainly less attention because our attention as NROs is a bit more far, it's a bit wider, it's a bit bigger scope and bigger picture. But the NROs and NPOs, we work closely together. So I included a photo here. Myself and NPO Chelsea Weegan, who she works in the Moraine View, Teresa Terrace neighborhood. Her and I got invited this February to go and read books to elementary students. And so we do the same thing, right? We were invited to the same events. We go together. This wasn't necessarily in her neighborhood, but it was in the district. And so we work very closely together and have some flexibility for those types of events, but her area is much more geographically specific than my broad picture of the whole district. We also have community policing teams, or what we call CPTs. Currently, it used to be that each district had their own community policing team. We've kind of changed that. So now the South, Midtown, and West police districts share one team, and the North and East districts share one team, and then Central has their own community policing team. And while the name community policing team might make you think, wow, this are probably very closely related, it's a little bit different. Our community policing teams are what I'd call our reactive element. They are sort of not tied to calls for service, but they are reactive to district needs in terms of traffic enforcement, in terms of making arrests of wanted persons, in terms of doing special projects as it relates to drug and nuisance abatement. So they do a lot more of what I'd call kind of that hard enforcement type of duties. And we'll get into a little bit of how that overlaps with what I do. And there is significant overlap, but that is a specific team of officers that kind of has that obligation of they're proactive, they're going out there, their job is less about being embedded in a particular area and more about being nimble, looking for those people that we're trying to get off the street, engaging those apprehension efforts, engaging in long-term investigation. So that's community policing teams. CORE, our Community Outreach and Resource Education Unit. Again, these are the groups that are not housed within that district command structure. They are in the community outreach chain of command, and actually most of those officers are funded through DOJ grants. So that is a team of 8 officers, and 6 of them specifically are funded through U.S. Department of Justice COPS grants. They have a specific focus on youth engagement. So some of the officers in that unit, they work on youth deflection and deferral, meaning if we as officers contact a youth who's committing an ordinance violation or a crime, how do we deflect them into a restorative justice type program, those sorts of things. So some of those officers work on that. And then others of those officers work on programming. I would say the bulk of their work is done through programming in neighborhoods, in districts, and then kind of citywide. So those core officers, 6 of them are assigned to liaise to our 6 districts. So each district has a core officer, but again, those officers, they all actually work out of the Midtown district. They're not usually in our district unless we're doing an event. So they kind of come and go, but again, are focused on that programming and planning. They also do some of our Citizen Academy planning. They do our Youth Academy planning, and engage a lot with those sorts of processes. So they're very busy in the summer. You can imagine many of our programs geared at youth happen outside of the school year. And so those officers have a lot of obligations right now, and I think they're at a youth academy right now as we speak. And then I did just want to include mental health officers. Mental health officers also fall in the community outreach chain of command, but are located in each of the districts. So each of the 6 districts has a mental health officer who stays here, who works here, has a desk here, and they are within the district, but not within the district's chain of command. So you can see quickly how all of these acronyms and chains of command add up to be quite a lot, and it's a lot to think about, but conceptually. Kind of my big picture is while we have many titles, we're all working towards similar goals. And thankfully, I planned ahead and I titled my slide that. So, right, we are one team. We do have one mission, but we have many roles that we use to get there. And ultimately, all of us are working towards sustainable communities, crime reduction, assisting our community with the needs that they have on a daily basis, and being responsive to what communities are asking for. And every neighborhood, every block, every person, every household has some different needs when they're contacting the police department. And ultimately, we use this tapestry of officers assigned to different functions to accomplish those goals. And I would just add that, by allowing some of our officers to specialize in an area or a subject or some type of thing that they care about, they can really gain relationships. They get a better understanding that we wouldn't have if we were just fielding a dozen extra patrol officers, right? We might not have the time. And patrol can be very transactional, right? When you're waiting for the radio to tell you the next thing, you do the best you can to service the call you're on, but you have a limited or finite amount of time to actually invest, get to know someone, get to do that long-term problem solving. And so patrol can be very transactional in that way. And when we build these specialized units, we get the benefit of building those deeper, broader relationships, getting that better understanding of what's going on in someone's life and how can we pivot to help them and deflect them away from patrol so that our patrol officers can spend more time responding to crime, responding to the actual emergencies, and engaging in the proactive work that we want them to. And I included in here something that my captain, Captain Tim Patton, always tells us, make patrol's job easier, right? I'll ask him, I don't know, probably once or twice a month, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And he'll always point me back to this refrain of make patrol's job easier. And so I have often summed up the role of a neighborhood officer as making patrol's job easier. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment just about the day to day, but thinking of that big picture, use that as your framework for trying to understand what it is that we're doing here. And then just generally speaking, officers who work in a neighborhood officer spot, who work in a mental health officer spot, who go into the core team, those officers are generally serving a 4-year term. It's a term limited thing, right? We want our officers to have an opportunity to do something specialized that fits their interests, that engages them. But we don't want them to be in one spot forever. We don't want stagnation. We want continuous growth, and we want to provide each kind of generation or successive group of officers those chances. So generally speaking, when we go into what we call a closed position, those officers are serving 5 year or 4 years with a possible 5th-year extension at the discretion of the chief of police. The one exception to this is those community policing teams. Those are a seniority-based pick. So every year when patrol picks their beats and their shifts, those CPT spots are open for auction and they go based on seniority. So that is the one sort of exception to that 4-year rule. So, what is the day to day? I think that this is a really interesting question to define because I'll tell you, today is an interesting day for me. I am here doing this presentation. This is my first thing on my agenda. And then after this, I will pivot to go and help one of our NPOs who is helping a Boys and Girls Club group do some training out at our training center today. And then after that, I'll go to a back to school event in one of the buildings that I serve as the NRO. And then after that, I will be going to a union board of directors meeting. And so it's really kind of each day is its own adventure and it really depends. And it just depends on what other hats I choose to wear and what other priorities I'm given. And so today will be a jam-packed day for me. And I'm just hopeful that I'll get you all out of here in time so that you don't see me blabbing for too long. But really, I would say the cornerstone of what any neighborhood officer, whether it be an NPO or an NRO, does is we build relationships. Ultimately, as we talked about, making patrol's job easier means that, hey, if I can help this person, if I can get to know this person and what their struggles are, what's going on in their life, I can have them call me directly about it. I can have them work with me to connect with service providers. I can do these things that mitigate maybe the chances that they're going to call patrol and take up time as a reactive call for service. So it's building that relationship with residents of the community. Of course, with our youth, I think that that's a big thing. And while CORE has a specific focus on youth, our neighborhood officers really get to know kids because we see them kind of as they grow, right? And you can imagine in a 4-year span, younger kids especially grow a lot, right? So I have a lot of 5, 6, and 7-year-olds at the Wexford Ridge apartment complex, which is one of my areas of responsibility as the NRO. And by the time I leave, they'll be, 12, 13, 14 years old, potentially, depending on what their age is now. And I'll see them into kind of that transition into being a teenager and get to know them. And it's always my hope to set them on the right path and to be that friendly face so that they know law enforcement officers can be trusted, and that we can kind of build that foundation in the community. One of the other things that we do a lot of is liaising with property managers and business owners. I tell people I will never turn down a calendar invite. I love to meet people. I love to know what's going on from each person's perspective, right? We all sit in different chairs in our professional capacities. We all sit in different chairs in our personal lives, right? And so it's great for me to get a good understanding of what that looks like. And that means meeting with people who hold kind of an ownership stake in a lot of communities and getting to know what concerns them and how can we best serve them. And so I feel lucky that I get to take that information, consolidate it, and bring it back to our patrol officers so that we can, as a police department, respond well. We also work a lot with community leaders, alders, members of city councils and commissions, nonprofit organizers, all of those things that you would think of. It's kind of that wraparound, getting a 360 of what's going on in our community and really engaging those pieces as they become necessary. Um, Neighborhood officers also engage in call response. There's an expectation that when you're working, you're taking the calls that are in your areas. So, as the West District NRO, kind of my focus, while it is district wide, I have a specific focus on the Tree Lane corridor, the Wexford Ridge Apartments, and now 7933 Tree Lane. It's reopened again. And if there are calls there when I'm working, I will be going there. Pretty much bar any exception, I'm going to take 100% of those calls when I'm here. And of course, I can't get everything, right? I'm one person and I've not yet mastered the technology of how to be in two places at once, but I'm working on it. And when I figure it out, I'll let you all know. But certainly, our time is our time, right? I don't have to go to every single call that happens on the west side. I don't need to go to the fender bender in the parking lot at Woodman's because it's not part of my obligation. But a patrol officer is still going to have to go to that. And so I get the time, the flexibility, the leniency to go to those calls and to have time to do other things like joining community groups for a meeting. We also do a lot of data analytics. We are a data-driven police department. I think we've made big strides in the way that data is accessible to officers. So I credit Chief Barnes for that. I think that some of the tools that he had created for us really help us with our job in that mission. We also rely on our data analysts. So we have a team of civilian data analysts who help us understand what are the trends, what are the repeat calls for service, what can we predict about pattern crime, who can we expect to be seeing, who are these pattern people that are popping up in our neighborhoods. And so we do a lot of that analysis so that we have a good understanding of, when something happens, what might we be talking about, what might we be looking at based on the data. We also do a lot of report review. Obviously, because we're not 24/7, 365, we have to review other officers' reports from our areas and from our neighborhoods to get a good understanding of what happened while I was gone on my 3 days off or what happened while I was on vacation. And we will also get directed the self-reports. So citizens can submit those online self-reports. If they come from our neighborhoods, generally speaking, they're going to be routed to us by a detective lieutenant for that follow-up. And then event planning and coordination. It's certainly a part of our job, and I would say I've gotten a lot better at it over time. And I pride myself. I was an RA in college, and so I planned events for a bunch of freshman boys pretty regularly, and that's a very different skill than planning for a whole neighborhood, but similar basis. And we plan everything from pop-up events. So this later this week we'll be grilling out in one of the NPOs, Alyssa Souza in her neighborhood, and we plan events that are easy, pop-up, small scale, all the way up to the National Night Out events, which just happened. And I'm proud to report that the West District had two National Night Out events, several hundred in attendance at each event, and so they were quite large in scale, and we were happy to play a role in that. But a lot of that planning and work comes to us as the neighborhood officers. So where are neighborhood officers? And Mike, you led off well with this. So there is one NRO. There's one of me in every district. Each district uses those officers a little bit differently. Some are true like free safeties. Some have more specific areas of focus. I would say most of us are given kind of those transitional problems. And so, like I said, I have the tree lane corridor as my area of responsibility. But here in the West District, again, Officer Chelsea Weegan, the Marine View, Teresa Terrace neighborhood, Officer Souza, the Balsam Russet Raymond neighborhood. And then we also have the Channel 3 community policing team. Their office is here. Again, they're shared though across South, Midtown, and West. The Midtown District, one NRO, and then the Braxton Bayview or the Triangle neighborhood has a neighborhood police officer, and then Allied Drive has a neighborhood police officer. The South District, one NRO, and then the Brams Addition neighborhood has an officer. Central is one NRO in State Street, and then Central has their own community policing team. That's more of an evening bar time entertainment zone focused team, and so it made sense for them to kind of be the standalone team there. The North District has one NRO, and then the Northport Packers corridor has an NPO. And then the East District has one NRO, and then the Darbo Webb Worthington neighborhood and Channel 1 CPT, that North and East community policing team is based there. So, how do we decide which neighborhood gets an NPO? I think many people might be wondering, hey, I'd like a neighborhood officer. This sounds pretty cool. Well, ultimately, there's a couple of things that go into these considerations, right? So generally, because NPOs have that limited geographical scope, having an identified neighborhood is pretty helpful, right? Knowing what some boundaries that we can draw that make sense is going to be a good start. And so sometimes we'll look at what are some neighborhood association boundaries or what are some clear geographic boundaries, based on streets that really make sense. And I'm going to keep coming back to this, but I think the best example of this is the Braxton Bayview area neighborhood officer. That area, for those that might not be familiar, is kind of the area bound by Park Street, West Washington Avenue, and Regent Street. And there are some large CDA-owned properties, as well as the Bayview Foundation owns a number of low-income housing there. And so that neighborhood is very geographically specific. It's literally a triangle on the map, and it has very clear boundaries, but it has a commonality to it. And I'll talk about this in a second, but kind of having that commonality of a neighborhood is also important. Sort of secondarily, we look at data, right? Where are the calls for service? Where are we seeing repeat things happening? And we take a long-term analysis, a 10-year look at where are calls for service. And that really informs what are the roles of neighborhood police officers? Where should we be deploying them to make the most impact, to have maximum success in these communities? Where do we see the need for it long term? And types of crime matters in that analysis. Of course, if we're seeing pattern violent crime or pattern property crime, that maybe puts us in a different decision-making framework versus if we're seeing, domestic crime, which is a little bit more random or transient, or, kind of that random one-off set of crime, right? And so we look at these patterns and we're trying to identify those patterns, and that's what allows our command staff to focus on which are these places that should get that geographically specific NPO. And then specific populations. So Braxton Bayview is a perfect example. Again, all the properties in that neighborhood are some type of low-income housing, whether it be CDA or Section 8 or nonprofit-based voucher housing. And a lot of that community is elderly or disabled. And there's a lot of aging in place that goes on there. And so there's specific considerations, there's specific types of crime, there's specific types of victimization that we see in groups like that. And so that neighborhood officer focuses a lot on those things. And it makes a lot of sense because it is a very thick concentration of that population of, people aging in place, people with low income, and people with not a lot of access to resources in this one really specific dense area. And so I'd almost say it was kind of perfectly bred for one person to be the neighborhood officer there. Similarly, State Street has a neighborhood officer. We all know, State Street is kind of the heart of the entertainment zone in Madison, and it has a specific set of needs. It has a specific clientele, right? It's not largely not residential. I mean, there's some, residential, but it's largely business focused, and there's a lot of concerns about, unhoused individuals. There's a lot of concern about kind of the nature of alcohol and alcohol serving establishments, and so it's got its own specific set of factors or challenges in a specific population that needs a specific type of policing. And so it's, again, another prime example of where we should put a neighborhood police officer. I will also reference we formerly had a Langdon Street officer. In, I don't know, maybe 2020 or 2021, we had to make some reductions and we lost our Langdon Street officer. But you can imagine that, Langdon Street being dominated by university students and largely the fraternities and sororities had, again, a specific population, a specific geography, and kind of a certain set of needs, right? The college students there have a different need or way that we interact with police than the senior citizens who maybe live at Braxton Place, right? And so you can kind of see how when we talk about these scopes or these types of populations or places, you can see how these decisions can sort of start to make sense. One of the questions that I thought was really insightful that Mike asked me to plan about or to speak about today was how can individuals support our neighborhood officers? And as I just mentioned, we're some of the first to be discussed when we speak about budget cuts. And I understand that budgets are finite, right? There's tough financial situations across the board. And I get it because neighborhood officers are a luxury. We are. And as proud as I am of my colleagues and as much stock as I put in my job, we are a luxury. And ultimately, this police department really would function without me, and patrol officers would pick up the slack, but it would be different, right? And again, if we go back to this idea of how do I make patrol's job easier? Well, if I'm not there, it's certainly going to make patrol's job harder. But we are a luxury. And as I said, we've lost two NPOs since I started with MPD in 2019. We lost the Langdon Street officer, and then we lost one on the south side. But that neighborhood kind of, I don't want to say graduated, right? But sort of moved into a more stable place. Some things had changed environmentally there. And when we faced a tough budgetary situation, those two officers were told that they'd be returning to patrol, and they did. And so when we talk about this, I think if you're seeing or finding a value in some of this work, advocate to city leaders when it comes time for the budget, right? And advocate to the chief of police when he sets the budget, because he needs to know, hey, these neighborhood officers are making an impact. I would also say partner with us. For those of you that are City of Madison residents, I say identify your district and reach out to your NROs if you have an idea of things that you think would be helpful in your neighborhood or on your block or in your community. We do a little bit of everything. We do events, we do presentations, we go to Coffee with a Cop. It's really a full grab bag of if you've got an idea that we can factor into, we're happy to do it. And I can't even begin to tell you the number of neighborhood associations that I've gone to this year to just give a presentation at their annual meetings, right? They might not be part of my tree lane focus, but they're in the West District. And so I'm happy happy to pull the data about calls for service there. I'm happy to learn about their neighborhood, and I'm happy to speak about what the MPD is doing in and around their community. And so, if you have something like that, generally a great point of contact is those neighborhood resource officers, those district-wide folks. And our information, I haven't actually looked at MPD's website in a quick minute, but I'm believing that our email should still be out there. So reach out to those folks, and if you need help with that, certainly I'll make sure Mike makes my contact information available, and I can help direct you to the right person. And then I would also say attend an event. If you hear that the police department is hosting an event, come on out, right? There's a good chance that one of our neighborhood officers probably has their hands in the cookie jar if we're doing an event, right? And so please join us. And I'm also going to make another plug here. I guess I feel like this is my second plug, so Mike, limit me if I'm getting too brand specific. But I put in here to support the Madison Community Policing Foundation, and I have a slide about this. Madison Community Policing Foundation, or MCPF, is a 501c3 organization that supports MPD community outreach efforts. I linked to their website here, and I'd have no problem if we shared this PowerPoint, but it's MadisonCommunityPolicingFoundation.org, so it's a long website. But it has a lot of great information there. And it's a group that's organized and governed by MPD retirees led by former Captain Joe Ballas. Captain Ballas was actually one of the very first Madison neighborhood officers. He worked on Simpson Street on the south side, which is now Lake Point Drive. And I believe I asked him this question, and I'm not sure exactly the years, but I believe he worked there in the mid to late 80s when he was a relatively new officer. He was the neighborhood officer for Simpson Street, and he did a 32-year career and retired. But I work with him all the time to help fund the endeavors that we do, because the Madison Police Department budget goes to salaries, it goes to squad cars, it goes to printer paper and to computers, right? Just like any organization's budget, we have a very finite set of dollars. And sometimes it's hard to find the $150 to go to Walmart to buy hot dogs to grill out with their community. And that's where MCPF comes in. They do a tremendous job of partnering with corporations. They do a great job of partnering with us and making funds available for the things that we care about that engage our community. I often go to Captain Ballas when I'm starting the planning for the 9/11 Memorial Blood Drive. Every year, MCPF helps us in getting a giveaway for those that come and donate, because it's a great community outreach event. It honors and supports law enforcement and firefighters. And so, like this year, we're giving away some customized water bottles to those that donate at that blood drive, and that's through the generosity of MCPF. And so we're really proud of that partnership. And if anyone is curious of how to support us directly, it is through MCPF, and they do a lot to support the logistics of neighborhood officers. They also organize our community policing advisory boards, or our CPABs. The CPABs started in spring of 2013, and each district has a CPAB. Each of those is 5 advisors. Generally speaking, these are people who are residents of the district that they're a part of the CPAB for. They're community organizers. They are, people who have a good depth and breadth of understanding of neighborhoods, and they break down a lot of barriers for us. And so I will give high kudos and praise to the West District CPAB. We have one of the assistant superintendents of the Madison Metro School District on our CPAB. We have a business owner. We have a community organizer. We have a retiree, and we have someone who works for a major corporation in the district. And so we really got a cross section of life, and I would say a good representation of who we want to reach out to and who the police department needs to be listening to out in the community. And so they do a great job of helping and supporting us. They share questions and concerns. They bring forward good ideas, and ultimately their foundational goal is to build trust and legitimacy between us as the police department and the citizens that we serve. And so we use that framework in a lot of different ways, right? And each thing is different, but they are very helpful in that organization.
Let me just
Um,
jump in there for a second, Hunter.
yeah,
I just encourage everyone to get involved, with these events as well as opportunities to participate in governance of the police department. There are so many opportunities here. One of the first things, I got started I just became curious with this. I started going to coffee with a cop every once in a while, and you learn so much about the officers who are working for us every day. You learn about the operations of the police department. You get to know people as people, not just guys with a badge in blue, right? So, and then, once you know something about it, get involved in these different organizations and, help guide our institutions along their way. Really, it's a special kind of city here, I think, where we have so many opportunities to participate. And so I just wanted to get that plug in too. I'm not plugging just, as often, but I'm still plugging for it. Anyway, thank you, Hunter, and keep going.
Well, I absolutely agree. And when I speak about my colleagues at the police department, I always say it takes all kinds of kinds, right? We are all individuals. We all have different strengths and skills. And the same goes for the people that we surround ourselves with, right? These advisors who represent these cross sections of our community, it takes all kinds of kinds. And so we're really happy to work with them and take their guidance, take their feedback, and use it to help us inform how we reach out to the community. So I absolutely agree. And then I just wanted to touch briefly on what we'd call like our auxiliary assignments, the things that we don't do full time, but that officers here do as in addition to or above and beyond their normal duties that kind of make the police department function. I thought that this was interesting, and I am a wearer of many hats, both literally and figuratively. I'm not wearing a hat today, so that joke doesn't land as funny, but I would say that many of our officers engage in a lot of things that kind of round out this police department and that get them out of their core function of whether it be patrol or being a detective or a sergeant. And kind of they go out and they work on these various projects. And so, of course, our SWAT team, we don't have a full-time SWAT team that is comprised of officers who have other assignments, detectives, sergeants who have other assignments, and they respond to the call as needed and they engage in their training at, twice a month usually. And they answer the call when we need SWAT. Our special events team, that's for our large events, our protests, our Mifflin Streets, our Halloweens. I don't think we call it Freak Fest anymore, but those types of events, those large scale things, those dignitary visits, when we're in a presidential election year and we're still a swing state, our set team is mobilized quite often for that. Our UAS, our unmanned aerial systems, our drone team, is a part-time obligation that officers volunteer their time to train and work with. Mounted patrol, we do have two officers who full-time work in the mounted patrol unit, but most of our riders are part-time and do that again above and beyond their obligations. Instructors, we run our own police academy and we have 9 personnel, police officers assigned to the training team. And so you can imagine 9 officers when you need a certain student to instructor ratio is not nearly enough to train all of our police officers through in-service and recertification and to train the new officers. So many of us are instructors in various disciplines. I am an instructor. I teach our new officers and our in-service officers. I teach firearms and what we call vehicle contacts. And there's about 14 disciplines within the law enforcement training system that officers get certified in to go and teach. Field training officers, right? When the new cops hit the street, they ride with that veteran field training officer. So officers volunteer and apply for that role. I also do that role and teach the new officers as they come out into the field and are learning the ropes. And peer support is a huge benefit to us. We have a peer support team, and again, above and beyond their obligations, our officers volunteer to support each other through stressful and critical situations and provide that guidance and that sympathetic and listening ear, and that's really honorable. Our union board of directors, that's an elected position, but also above and beyond. I spend I'm on our union board of directors. I'm one of 10 directors, and I spend a significant amount of time on that. And so I had to include it in here because it takes up a large chunk of my time, and it's a labor of love as we help officers navigate disciplinary proceedings, investigations, and we deal with contract negotiations, workplace safety issues, just like any union in your workplace. We do the same thing for police officers. CRACE, the civilian response to active shooter events. That group of instructors, again, something I'm part of, goes out into the community pretty much every week. We're doing at least one presentation teaching people how to respond to active shooter, but it's a very community forward, community focused group. And so a group there. Recruiters, of course, are going out there and finding that next generation of MPD. Amigos en Azul, our Hispanic youth outreach group, and actually we partner with other surrounding jurisdictions, Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, McFarland, Monona, Middleton, to make a coalition of sorts with that group. And they do a lot of great things for our Hispanic community and outreach to them. Black Officer Coalition, our Black officers proudly organize that and do a lot of good community volunteerism and organization and outreach. And so another great group, very similar to what Amigos does. Shop with a Cop. When I was a kid, I was a Shop with a Cop kid. I was a participant. And so it's always fun each year when we get to give back and make Christmas happen for a family and take the kids shopping. And so it's one that I particularly love because it resonates with me from 15 years ago when I was a youth, and so I really love that. Background investigators, officers who everyone who applies to this job gets a background investigation, right? We need to know who we're talking to in the hiring process, and so we have officers who work through those things. Various committees, and I put in more acronyms because it's MPD and I couldn't help myself, right? But we have what we call an officer advisory committee. They're kind of I don't want to call them the complaint department, but they're sort of the complaint department in some ways, and they help shape our communications as officers with our command staff and the things that we're looking for as officers. Vehicle operations review committee, and then pursuit review committee. So we have officers who are subject matter experts in driving and pursuits, and they volunteer their time to review driving, crash related things, pursuits, and those sorts of things because they're experts at that for one reason or another. Internal admissions, we have officers who volunteer to help screen candidates when we're advancing them through the hiring process. We have a staffing committee currently going, again, something that I'm on to examine how do we best deploy our officers and, looking at our shift model and those sorts of things. And so you can see there's so many ways to get your hands involved at the department. And, we've got domestic violence liaison, gang intelligence liaison, these officers who care about a specific topic that dig deeper into those investigations, follow up with victims, follow up with community members to get intelligence, those sorts of things. MARI, the Madison Area Recovery Initiative, that's our deflection program for those suffering from substance use disorder. We have officers that are part of a larger team or cadre that go out and reach out to people with peer support. To help kind of help people through substance use disorder and those sorts of things. Of course, the police honor guard, law enforcement funerals, law enforcement ceremonies. You'd see those people. They're in the overcoats and the 8-point hats and the fancy uniforms, and they like at a funeral might present the flag to a fallen officer's family or something like that. And then on top of that, there are too many to name, but special projects and causes. And again, for me, I coordinate that 9/11 Memorial Blood Drive because that's special and that's important to me. There are officers who engage with the Special Olympics. There are officers who engage with any number of things. And those causes or projects that are adjacent to our job, we're very fortunate to be given the time and opportunity to do that. And it's gotten a little bit easier for me transitioning from patrol to the neighborhood role where I have some more time to lean into some of these things, but we give all of our officers that opportunity. And I just wanted to include some photos here. Most of the photos throughout this I took. I dabble in amateur photography, but I just share a few with you of some of our SWAT team officers. This was from National Night Out last week. Captain Patton, he was having a blast and meeting a young new friend out at the park. Chief Valenta, similarly, having a great time at National Night Out. Of course, our mounted unit with some of our community partners, and that's it. That's what I have. So I know there's a lot in there, and there's a lot of things to talk about there. So, Mike, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions that anybody might have.
Well, thank you, Hunter. Really appreciate it. Please, everyone, unmute yourselves. If you have questions, comments, experiences with the police department, feel free to join in and let's get a discussion going here. I might start it off here just real quick, Hunter. You know, you mentioned at one point aging in place, a lot of people aging in
Yeah.
place, and we do see entire communities of retirees developing, you know, and they're not all swanky hotel sort of arrangements, you know, some are very basic neighborhoods. And, you know, you hear or read about people being, you know, elders being exploited both by, uh, you know, family as well as these scammers who call up and, you know, talk them into giving away their, uh, you know, retirement savings. I mean, how does an officer specialize in that? I mean, you have so many other jobs to do. How does a neighborhood officer really become knowledgeable enough to work in an area like, you know, Braxton Place, you said, for example? Hello? Hello?
Shame
Oh,
on me, Mike. My computer died.
yeah.
It had been on the charger, and so I apologize. And I was just listening to your question of we were talking about aging in place,
Yeah,
and
aging in place.
go ahead with that.
And how do you, I mean, there are so many things going on, you know, and working with retirees, you know, especially, you know, once you've settled in, you know, you're on the downhill slope of life, right?
Right.
How is it that you can become knowledgeable enough to really be effective if you only have, you know, that 4 year term when you're, you know, in that particular position as an NRO, an NPO, or whatever?
Well, I'll say it starts with candidate selection, right?
Yeah.
So these positions are positions that we apply for. They're positions that we compete for. And so I can give you the example of Braxton Bayview is where we specifically see this in a neighborhood officer context. The officer who stepped into that role had been serving as the patrol officer on the afternoon shift in that neighborhood for 4 years before he started being the neighborhood officer there, right? And so he had kind of a 4 year jump on understanding what's going on in the community and worked very closely with the previous neighborhood officer to kind of address some of those concerns or those issues that come in place. And similarly here, Officer Alyssa Souza, who is the Balsam Russet Raymond neighborhood officer, she patrolled that neighborhood for 10 years before she became the neighborhood officer. And so there's a lot of screening and advanced homework that happens that kind of leads to that candidate selection, finding the right fit. And so we start there. But I will say 4 years is a short turnaround in the grand scheme of things. And the first year is sort of like a sprint, and then we transition into marathon, right? Getting caught up to speed on what is going on, understanding community partners, and having a willingness to listen and learn. I think that those are huge. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the job of law enforcement doesn't necessarily change based on the context. It might look a little different, but our mission, our objective, our core guiding principles are going to be the same. And so we lean back on that of like when we don't necessarily know what to do, we know how to be cops. And how do we be cops in a specific context? It's a different question, but we kind of have our North Star guiding principles. And the other good news is that, you know, all of our neighborhood officers, we report all directly to our command staff, who generally are longer tenured individuals, people who have been here for 15, 20, 25 years and have a much grander scale of things and have learned some of these lessons maybe the hard way, maybe the easy way, but have learned these lessons. And so getting caught up to speed is often a big challenge. And in particular, dealing with specific communities, whether it be senior citizens or whether it be unhoused individuals, whatever, requires a willingness to learn. And so we send our officers to trainings that they need to go to meet with community partners that they need to meet with, and to get that context. And so we lean into those partnerships, and we're always willing to learn. And I think a willingness to learn and a desire for continuous improvement is a big facet of those neighborhood officers.
Excellent. Please jump in. Everyone get
I have
questions.
something. I might have missed this, and I know it's not within the actual police department, but the CARES program, you work closely with the CARES program, which is, I think it's the fire department and Journey Mental Health, not specifically police, but I mean, I look at that as a really important resource for the police department as well.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely correct. We are fortunate to work with them a lot. We don't always see them because a lot of what they do actually deflects away from us. And so typically, when they go to something, unless the circumstances are evolving or changing, which does happen pretty frequently, we're not even necessarily aware of it. They don't operate on the same radio channel that we do. They operate on the same computer system, so you can see their calls in passing, but you don't hear them going to things, and they handle many things that we would have otherwise previously been called to. The nice part about that, though, is that they dovetail very well into our crisis response co-responder model that we have at the police department. So we have embedded crisis workers through Journey Mental Health, the same group that supports and is that responder element for the CARES team. We have two of them that work here at the police department, and they will correspond with a mental health officer. And so we share information back and forth that way. And a lot of information gets disseminated from the mental health unit. Again, Journey Mental Health being that component that overlaps the fire department and the police department and CARES, kind of being that underpinning agency. And so they're huge. They're a great asset for us. I think that they just had their, I believe, 10,000th call for service not that long ago. A few weeks ago, they posted on social media that they've responded to 10,000 calls for service. That doesn't surprise me in the slightest, when you consider that MPD is responding to about 175 to 200,000 calls for service in a year. To say 10,000 of them would be good fits for CARES is not surprising to me.
I'll jump in quick, because I've got to run to another meeting. But Hunter, first of all, thank you just for the presentation and for the work you do in our community. It's so beneficial. I work with Safe Communities, and I was just wondering if I could maybe reach out to you afterwards. We do a lot of work in the communities that you talked about, and also trying to get harm reduction resources in those communities, and suicide prevention resources, and falls prevention resources. So um,
Yes.
I'll
Yes.
I'll
And
send you an email.
that would be perfect. I know, obviously, we know Jean Papalia very well because of her former role. And so always happy to look for that partnership. So, Ashley, please send me an email and I'd be happy to connect with you.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, terrific. And yeah, Ashley's terrific to work with. She's really great. Uh, Anyone else, please chime in here. We're running up to 11 o'clock, but if you have a question, I'm sure Hunter's got a minute here. No more questions. Okay, well then, Hunter, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out this morning to talk with us. It's been an incredibly informative presentation. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing you the next time at Coffee with a Cop. Everyone, if you get a chance to come to Coffee with a Cop, if you're wondering where it is in your town or in your neighborhood, call the police department and ask them about it. They're all over the city, and it's really a great chance to get to know people.
Well,
But
thanks, Mike. And again, I apologize for my computer battery snafu. I thought these things were a little more durable than that, so I apologize for that. But I did just see Jan threw a question in the chat, and so I'd be happy to answer that if she just wants to stay on. She asks, kind of with my home situation growing up, what helps put me on the right path in the future? And I think that's a good question.
yeah,
I would say, the support of other family, right? And having some strong influences, some strong role models, teachers, people in my community growing up were really strong influences that helped me stay focused and stay on the right path. And, I hope to be that person for someone. We might not know it, right? There's that old saying that we're planting trees that will never climb, right? And I think that that's really true in the neighborhood policing context, right? I might not know what my impact will be on someone, but 20 years from now, it's my hope that some young child or some person who had an opportunity to run into me says, you know what? This was impactful. This was changing, and so I hope to be that person for someone. And it takes a village. It really does. And so I was lucky to have a good village, and in particular, one of my teachers in elementary school, he was tremendously influential, and I still go and visit him. We get lunch probably once every couple of months and see each other and catch up. And it takes a village, and so I had a good village, and I appreciate that question and hope that we can all be part of someone's village.
well, that's a great question and a great answer. Anyone else before we click off? Okay, then. Well, thanks again, Hunter. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you next month.